I have your son, whispered the letter that made the rancher's wife saddle her horse in the storm. The letter arrived with the storm. Martha Crenshaw held the crumpled paper in her hands. Watching the words blur through tears she refused to let fall. The candle on the kitchen table flickered with each gust of wind that found its way through the cabin's old boards. Outside, lightning split the sky like God himself was tearing the world in half. We have your boy. Come alone to Devil's Canyon at first light. Bring $500 or you'll never see him again. The words were written in a child's hand, shaky and uncertain. Tommy's hand. Her 8-year-old son had been forced to write his own ransom note. Martha's fingers traced the letters, feeling the deep grooves where he had pressed too hard with the pencil. She could see him in her mind, scared and trying to be brave, the way he always did when the thunder got too loud. James was 3 days gone with the cattle drive. 3 days to the north with 40 head of their best stock, trying to make enough money to keep the bank from taking their land. He wouldn't be back until Sunday, and Sunday felt like a lifetime away. The storm rattled the windows like angry ghosts, and Martha was alone with her fear and the terrible choice that lay before her. $500. They didn't have $500. They barely had 50. She stood and walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Lightning flashed again, and for just a moment she could see the empty corral where Tommy's pony should have been. The boy had been out checking the fence line when the storm rolled in. She had expected him back before dark, but dark had come and gone, and now she knew why her son had never made it home. The wind howled through the gaps in the cabin walls, carrying with it the smell of rain and something else. Something that tasted like fear and violence. Martha closed her eyes and let herself remember Tommy's laugh, the way it sounded like water running over stones. She remembered how he helped her with the morning chores, his small hands careful with the chicken eggs, his face serious with concentration. She would not lose him. Not to outlaws. Not to anyone. Martha walked to the bedroom she shared with James and knelt beside the old trunk at the foot of their bed. Inside, wrapped in her mother's wedding quilt, lay her father's rifle. She had not touched it since the day they buried him 5 years ago. The weapon felt heavy in her hands, heavier than she remembered. The wood was still smooth, still warm somehow, as if it remembered her father's touch. Her father had been a gentle man who never looked for trouble. But when trouble found him, he knew what to do. He had taught her to shoot when she was 12, making her practice until she could hit a tin can from 50 yards. A woman alone on the frontier needs to know how to protect herself, he had said. The world ain't always kind to those who can't fight back. Martha loaded the rifle with steady hands, though her heart was beating like a wild bird trapped in a cage. She found her father's old cartridge belt in the bottom of the trunk and strapped it around her waist. The leather was cracked with age, but it still held. Everything still held, even when it felt like the world was falling apart. She went to the kitchen and took bread and dried meat from the cupboard, stuffing them into a canvas sack. She filled her father's old canteen with water and added that to her supplies. Then she stood in the middle of her home, looking around at the life she and James had built together. The rocking chair where she nursed Tommy as a baby. The table where they ate their meals and said their prayers. The bed where they whispered their dreams and fears to each other in the darkness. All of it might be gone when she returned. If she returned, the storm was getting worse. Rain hammered against the roof like bullets, and the wind screamed through the canyon beyond their land. It was a night for staying inside, for sitting by the fire and waiting for morning. But morning might be too late. The men who had taken Tommy were not the kind to wait patiently. They were desperate, and desperate men did desperate things. Martha put on her father's old coat, the one that still smelled like tobacco and leather and the particular scent of a man who worked the land with his hands. She pulled on her boots and wrapped a scarf around her head. Then she took the rifle and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit her like a fist, nearly knocking her backward. Rain stung her face and soaked through her clothes in seconds. But she pressed forward, fighting her way to the barn where a mare waited. Belle was a good horse, steady and strong, with eyes that seemed to understand the weight of the world. Martha saddled her quickly, her hands shaking from cold and fear. "Easy, girl," she whispered into the horse's ear. "We've got work to do." She mounted Belle and turned toward the canyon. Lightning illuminated the path ahead, showing her the way through the darkness. The trail was muddy and treacherous, but Belle knew it well. They had ridden this way many times, Martha and her horse, checking on cattle or looking for strays. But tonight was different. Tonight, they were riding towards something that might destroy them both. As they left the safety of the ranch behind, Martha thought about the letter again. About Tommy's handwriting, shaky with fear. About the men who would use a child to get what they wanted. About the choice she was making, riding alone into the storm with nothing but a rifle and a prayer. The canyon was 5 miles away, but it might as well have been 500. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and the trail was getting worse with each step. But Martha pressed on, her father's coat wrapped around her like armor, his rifle across her lap like a promise. She thought about James, sleeping under the stars with the cattle, not knowing that his world was about to change. She thought about Tommy, somewhere out there in the darkness, waiting for his mother to come for him. She thought about the men who had taken him, and what she would do when she found them. The wind carried her prayers up into the storm, and lightning touched the ground ahead of her like a sign from heaven. Martha Crenshaw rode toward Devil's Canyon, toward her son, toward a reckoning that would test everything she believed about right and wrong, mercy and justice, love and hate. Behind her, the empty ranch waited in the darkness, holding its breath for whatever morning would bring. The outlaw camp sat in the belly of Devil's Canyon like a secret the earth was trying to keep. Martha found it just as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the storm clouds. She had followed the canyon trail through the worst of the night, Belle's hooves slipping on wet stone, both of them soaked to the bone and shivering with cold. She could smell the smoke before she saw the fire. With smoke mixed with something else, the smell of unwashed men and desperation. Martha dismounted and led Belle behind a cluster of rocks, her father's rifle ready in her hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she crept forward, using the sound of rain and thunder to mask her approach. The camp was smaller than she had expected. 3 men huddled around a dying fire under a canvas tarp stretched between 2 canyon walls. Their horses stood nearby, heads down against the storm. And there, wrapped in a dirty blanket near the fire, was Tommy. Even from 30 yards away, Martha could see that something was wrong with her son. He lay too still, his small body curled into itself like a wounded animal. One of the men, a young one with sandy hair, kept looking at Tommy with worried eyes. "He's been like this since midnight," the young man was saying, "burning up with fever. Maybe we should what, Pete?" The voice belonged to a man Martha couldn't see clearly. He was sitting with his back to her, his shoulders hunched against the cold. "Take him to a doctor. Tell them how he came by a sick kid." "We never meant for this to happen, Cole," said a third man, older, with a gray beard that hung down to his chest. "We was just looking for horses." The boy saw us and started yelling. "What were we supposed to do?" Cole stood up then, and Martha got her first clear look at him. He was tall and thin, with dark hair that hung in his eyes and clothes that had seen better days. But it was his face that stopped her cold. It was the face of a man who had lost everything and knew it. "We do what we have to do, Henry," Cole said quietly. "Same as always." Martha watched as Cole knelt beside Tommy and placed a gentle hand on the boy's forehead. The gesture was so careful, so tender, that it caught her off guard. This was not what she had expected from the man who had stolen her son. "His fever's getting worse," Cole said. "The storm's got him chilled to the bone, but he's burning up inside." He looked at Pete and Henry with eyes that held too much sorrow for a man who couldn't be more than 30. "We're in over our heads here, boys." That was when Martha stepped out of the shadows, her rifle trained on Cole's chest. "Step away from my son." All 3 men froze. Pete's hand moved toward his gun, but Cole held up a hand to stop him. "Easy," Cole said, his voice calm despite the barrel pointed at his heart. "No need for anyone to get hurt." "You already hurt someone," Martha said. Her voice was steady, but inside she was screaming. Tommy looked so small, so helpless wrapped in that dirty blanket. You hurt my boy. Cole's eyes met hers across the dying fire, and Martha saw something there that surprised her. Shame. Real, deep shame that sat in a man's soul like a stone. We never meant for the boy to get sick, he said quietly. We needed horses. Food. We've been running for 3 weeks now, and we're down to nothing. So you steal children? We steal what we have to steal. The words came out harder than Martha expected, but then Cole's voice softened again. But not children. Never children. Henry shifted nervously. Cole, maybe we should... Shut up, Henry. Cole never took his eyes off Martha. Ma'am, I know you got every right to shoot me where I stand. But before you do, maybe you could take a look at your boy. He needs help that we can't give him. Martha kept the rifle steady, but she let her gaze flick to Tommy. Even in the dim light, she could see the flush of fever on his cheeks, the way his breathing came too fast and too shallow. Fear clenched in her stomach like a fist. Let me go to him, she said. Cole nodded and stepped back, his hands raised. Pete, put your gun down. Henry, you too. Martha moved carefully around the fire, never lowering her rifle, until she was close enough to kneel beside Tommy. The moment she touched his forehead, she knew how bad it was. His skin burned like the surface of a stove, and when she spoke his name, his eyes opened but didn't seem to see her. Mama. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Martha set the rifle aside and gathered Tommy into her arms. He was so hot it was like holding a live coal, but she held him anyway, rocking him gently while the storm raged overhead. How long has he been like this? She asked Cole. Started around sunset. Got worse through the night. Cole crouched down across from her, his face creased with worry. We tried to keep him warm, but the storm... He trailed off, running a hand through his wet hair. Martha looked at this man who had taken her son, this desperate outlaw who now knelt in the mud looking like he might cry. Why, she asked. Why did you take him? Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was so low she almost couldn't hear it over the rain. I had a boy once, about his age, and a wife. He stared into the dying fire. They died of fever 2 winters ago. Nothing I could do to save them. Nothing at all. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Martha felt something shift inside her chest, some small crack in the wall of her anger. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. So am I. Cole looked at Tommy, then back at Martha. Ma'am, I know you've got no reason to trust me, but your boy needs medicine. Needs to get warm and dry. We got some whiskey that might help break the fever, and there's a cave deeper in the canyon where we could build a proper fire. Martha studied his face in the firelight. She saw desperation there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked like the ghost of a father's love. You help me save my son, she said quietly, and we'll talk about what comes next. Cole nodded. Pete, help me get the boy to the cave. Henry, gather up the horses. We need to get him out of this storm. As they prepared to move deeper into the canyon, Martha held Tommy close and whispered prayers into his burning hair. She had come here expecting to find monsters, but instead she had found broken men who reminded her that sometimes the line between good and evil was thinner than the edge of a knife. The storm still raged above them, but in the shelter of the canyon, something like hope began to flicker to life. Dawn came slowly to Devil's Canyon, seeping through the storm clouds like water through cloth. Martha had not slept. She had spent the long night holding Tommy in the cave Cole had led them to, feeling his small body burn with fever while the 3 outlaws took turns feeding the fire and bringing her water from a spring deeper in the canyon. Now, as the first pale light crept into their shelter, Martha could see things she had missed in the darkness. She could see the way Pete's clothes hung loose on his thin frame, how his boots were worn through at the soles. She could see Henry's hands, trembling not from fear but from hunger, and the careful way he rationed the last of their coffee. She could see Cole sitting against the cave wall, his eyes red from watching over them all night, his face gaunt with the kind of tiredness that came from running too long with too little. These were not the ruthless outlaws she had imagined. These were desperate men at the end of their rope, men who had made bad choices because good choices had been taken from them. Tommy stirred in her arms and opened his eyes. For the first time since she had found him, His gaze seemed clear. "Mama," he whispered, his voice dry as dust. "I'm here, baby." Martha pressed her lips to his forehead. "Still hot, but not the burning heat of the night before. How do you feel?" "Thirsty." Tommy tried to sit up, but the effort made him dizzy. "Where are we?" Before Martha could answer, Cole appeared at her side with a cup of water. "Easy, boy," he said gently. "Small sips. Don't want to make yourself sick." Tommy looked at Cole with curious eyes. "Are you the bad man?" Cole's face went still. Martha watched him struggle with the question, saw the pain that flickered across his features. "I reckon I am," Cole said finally. "But I'm trying to be better." Tommy nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. He took the water from Cole's hands and drank carefully, the way his mother had taught him. "Much obliged," Tommy said, handing the cup back. Cole smiled then, the first real smile Martha had seen from him. "You're mighty polite for a boy who's been through what you have." "Mama says being polite don't cost nothing," Tommy replied. "And it might earn you something good." Martha felt her heart squeeze. Even sick and scared, her son was still the boy she had raised, still carrying the lessons she had taught him. As the morning light grew stronger, Pete emerged from the deeper part of the cave, carrying an armload of wood. He had been keeping the fire going all night, Martha realized, staying awake to make sure Tommy stayed warm. "How's the boy?" Pete asked, his young face creased with worry. "Better," Martha said. "Thanks to all of you." Pete flushed red and looked away. "Wasn't nothing special. Any decent person wouldn't have taken him in the first place," Cole interrupted, his voice hard with self-recrimination. Martha studied Cole's face in the growing light. "Why did you?" "Really?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. Henry had joined them now, the three men sitting around the fire like they were afraid to come too close to her and Tommy. "We've been riding for 3 weeks," Cole said finally, "running from a job that went bad in Silver Creek. The law's been on us hard, and we ain't had a proper meal or a safe place to sleep since we left town." "What kind of job?" Martha asked. "Bank," Henry said quietly, but it wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. The banker's wife was there with her baby. She got scared, started screaming. The banker reached for a gun. Henry's voice trailed off. "Man got shot," Pete finished. "Wasn't supposed to die, but he did. Now we got murder charges following us." Martha felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Did you kill him?" "I did." Cole's voice was flat, empty. "I pulled the trigger. Man was just trying to protect his family, and I killed him for it." The cave went silent except for the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of rain still falling outside. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Cole continued. "But meaning don't bring a man back from the dead. Don't make his wife stop crying or his baby stop looking for a daddy who ain't coming home." Martha looked at her son, sleeping peacefully now in her arms, and tried to imagine what she would do if someone took him from her forever. The anger should have come then, hot and righteous. Instead, she found herself thinking about the pain in Cole's voice, the way he had held his hands when he spoke about the banker's wife. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you got a right to know who you're dealing with," Cole said. "Because you got a choice to make, and you should make it with all the facts." Martha stood up carefully, settling Tommy on the blanket Pete had spread near the fire. She walked to the mouth of the cave and looked out at the canyon. The storm was finally breaking, thin shafts of sunlight cutting through the clouds like golden arrows. "What choice?" she asked. "You could turn us in," Cole said. "Take your boy and ride home. Send the sheriff back for us. We're too tired to run much farther." Martha turned back to face the three men. They were watching her with the careful attention of animals who had learned to expect the worst from life. "Or," she prompted. Cole looked surprised. "Or what? You said I had a choice." "That usually means more than one option." Cole exchanged glances with Pete and Henry. "I reckon you could just let us go. Give us a head start before you tell anyone where we are." Martha nodded slowly. "Those are the choices you see." "Yes, ma'am." Martha walked back to the fire and knelt down beside Tommy. Her son was sleeping again, his breathing easier now, the fever finally starting to break. She thought about the long ride home, about James returning to find their world changed. She thought about the empty bunks in their bunkhouse, the work that needed doing on the ranch, The fact that 3 more pairs of hands might mean the difference between keeping their land and losing it. "There's a third choice," she said quietly. The 3 men stared at her. "You could come work for me." The silence stretched out like a rope pulled tight. Finally, Pete laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't want our kind working your ranch." "Maybe I do." Martha looked at each of them in turn. "You spent all night taking care of my sick boy. You shared your food and water with me. You could have run when I showed up with that rifle, but you stayed to help." She paused. "Maybe you made some bad choices. Maybe you got blood on your hands that can't be washed off. But right now, today, you're acting like decent men." Cole's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you do that? After what we done?" Martha looked at Tommy, at her son who had looked at Cole and asked if he was the bad man, then accepted his help anyway. Children saw things simply sometimes. Maybe they saw things more clearly because of it. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," she said. "Because my ranch needs workers, and you need work. Because sometimes the best men are the ones who've learned from their worst mistakes." She stood up and faced them, her decision made. "The offer stands. But if you come with me, you come as hired hands, not as outlaws. You work honest, you live honest, and you leave your past where it belongs." Cole stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "If you'll have us, we'll work honest." Outside, the sun was climbing higher, burning away the last of the storm clouds. Tommy opened his eyes and smiled at his mother, and Martha knew they were all going home. The sun was high and warm on Martha's face as they rode out of Devil's Canyon. Tommy sat in front of her on Belle's saddle, wrapped in Cole's clean blanket, his fever finally broken, but his body still weak from the long night. Behind them rode 3 men who had entered the canyon as outlaws and were leaving as something else entirely. The storm had passed completely, leaving the world washed clean and bright. Puddles reflected the blue sky like scattered mirrors, and the air smelled of rain and new grass and the particular freshness that comes after thunder moves on. Birds were singing in the cottonwoods along the creek, and somewhere in the distance, cattle were lowing peacefully. "Mama," Tommy said quietly, "are those men really going to work for us now?" Martha looked back at Cole, Pete, and Henry. They rode in silence, leading their horses carefully along the muddy trail. Their faces were different in the daylight, younger somehow, as if the decision to change had lifted years of hard living from their shoulders. "If they want to," Martha said. "People can change if they truly want to, Tommy. Sometimes all they need is someone to believe they can." Tommy nodded seriously, the way he did when he was thinking hard about something. "Papa might not like it at first." "No," Martha agreed. "He might not. But your papa is a good man. He'll see what I see given time." The ride home took most of the day. They stopped twice to rest Tommy and let him drink water from the canteen Cole had filled at the canyon spring. Each time they stopped, Martha watched the 3 men. They were careful around her and Tommy, respectful in a way that spoke of genuine shame for what they had done. When Tommy dropped his water cup, Pete dismounted immediately to retrieve it. When the boy shivered, Henry offered his own coat without being asked. These were not the actions of hardened criminals. These were the actions of men who had remembered how to care about something other than their own survival. As they crested the hill that looked down on the Crenshaw ranch, Martha felt her heart squeeze with relief. The cabin sat unchanged in the valley below, smoke rising from the chimney where she had left the fire banked. The barn stood solid and red against the green pasture, and the corral fence that Tommy had been mending when he was taken stretched straight and true in the afternoon light. "Home," Tommy whispered, and the word carried more weight than any prayer. Cole pulled his horse up beside theirs. "Ma'am, maybe we should make camp somewhere else tonight. Give you and the boy time to settle in. Give your husband time to adjust to the idea of us being here." Martha considered this. It would be easier, perhaps, less of a shock for James. But she had made her choice in the canyon, and she would stand by it. "No," she said. "If you're going to be part of this ranch, you need to start now. There's a bunkhouse behind the barn. It's not much, but it's clean and dry." Cole nodded, though she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am." They rode down into the valley as the sun, was beginning to sink toward the western mountains. Martha felt the familiar peace that always came with returning home, but it was different now. Deeper somehow. She had left this place as a desperate mother chasing kidnappers. She was returning as something else, a woman who had looked into the darkness and chosen light instead of vengeance. The first thing she did was get Tommy settled in his own bed. The boy was exhausted from the journey, but his color was good and his eyes were bright. She made him soup from the chicken she had left simmering on the stove and watched with relief as he ate with real appetite. "The men are in the bunkhouse?" Tommy asked between spoonfuls. "Yes. They're probably settling in, trying to figure out what comes next." "Are you scared, Mama?" "About what Papa will say." Martha smoothed Tommy's hair back from his forehead. "A little. But sometimes doing the right thing is scary. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it." Outside, she could hear the men moving around the bunkhouse, their voices low and respectful. They were trying not to intrude, she realized, trying to make themselves as small as possible while they waited to see if James would accept them or run them off at gunpoint. James returned 3 days later, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. Martha was in the garden, pulling weeds from the potato patch, when she heard the familiar sound of cattle and horses coming up the valley. She stood and shaded her eyes with her hand, watching as James rode ahead of the herd, his tall frame easy to recognize even at a distance. Tommy came running from the barn, where he had been helping Pete repair a broken stall door. "Papa's home," he shouted, his voice carrying across the yard. Martha watched as James rode closer, saw the exact moment he noticed the 3 strange horses in the corral, the unfamiliar faces around the barn. His back went straight, and his hand moved instinctively toward the rifle in his saddle boot. "James," Martha called, walking toward him with her hands visible and empty. "Welcome home." He dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving the 3 men who had emerged from the barn to watch his arrival. Cole stood slightly in front of Pete and Henry, ready to take whatever anger James might direct their way. "Martha," James said carefully, "you want to tell me who these men are and why they're on our land?" Before Martha could answer, Tommy ran up and threw his arms around his father's waist. "Papa, I got sick, but I'm better now. And Mama brought home help for the ranch." James's eyes found Martha's over Tommy's head. In them, she saw confusion, wariness, and the beginning of fear. "Help. It's a long story," Martha said, "but the short version is that these men are Cole, Pete, and Henry. They're going to be working for us, if you'll have them." James's gaze moved to Cole. "Mister, I don't know you from Adam, but I know the look of trouble when I see it, and you got that look." Cole stepped forward, his hat in his hands. "Yes, sir, I do. But I'm hoping to lose it, if you'll give me the chance." "Give you the chance to what?" "To be the man I should have been all along." The silence stretched out across the yard. Martha could hear the cattle settling in the pasture, the sound of wind in the cottonwoods, the distant call of a meadow lark. She could feel the weight of the moment, the knowledge that everything they had built in Devil's Canyon, the trust, the hope, the fragile beginning of redemption, hung on what James would say next. Finally, James looked at his wife. "You trust him?" "I do. Tommy's safe." "He is." James studied the 3 men for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "If Martha says you're worth trusting, then I reckon you are. But I'll be watching. All of you. Any sign that you mean my family harm, and you'll be off this land faster than you came onto it." "Understood," Cole said, "and appreciated." That night, after the cattle were settled and the horses were fed, the Crenshaw family sat down to dinner with their 3 new hands. Martha had cooked enough food for an army, and they all ate in a silence that was comfortable rather than strained. As they shared bread and talked quietly about the work that needed doing, Martha felt something settle in her chest. Peace, perhaps, or maybe just the satisfaction of knowing she had chosen mercy over anger, hope over fear. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the clear sky. The storm was truly over now, and the land was green and growing again. Sometimes, Martha thought, the greatest victories were the ones that healed wounds instead of making new ones. Sometimes the best families were the ones you chose rather than the ones you were born into. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, A letter that arrived with a storm could lead not to tragedy, but to grace.